Hi, Robin.
Hello, hi, Leonard.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good.
Okay, it's 5 p.m. Central European time, so welcome everyone and good local time to everyone. So today welcome to another edition of our VDEV CEPR BREAD seminar series. And today we are very happy to have Leonard Wantchekon from Princeton University and the African School of Economics. Before I give the stage to Leonard, let me just run you very quickly through the basic rules of the seminar. So as most of you know, the seminar will go on for 1 hour, where Leonard will present his paper, and during his presentation, you can ask any questions you may have through the Q&A section of Zoom. We are going to be collecting these questions and passing on some of them to Leonard to answer during the talk. In any case, even if your questions do not get passed on to Leonard directly, we'll give him the copy of all the questions and comments that you put on. And later at 6 p.m. Central European time, we'll open the floor for questions that you can ask live. So if you have any questions, you can just start raising your hand 5 minutes before. And well, basically that's it. Leonard, thank you very much for agreeing to present your super exciting work
Thank you.
in this seminar, and the floor is yours for the next hour.
Thank you for the opportunity. I decided to present. 1 second. Okay. So I'm going to be presenting a program, a research program, as opposed to a paper. And I'll be building on work that's published, some that's actually in a working paper version, and then some that are ongoing. So, and this project is really part of the research portfolio of African School of Economics. And we want to focus on 3 areas: political economy, education externalities in particular, and then also infrastructure. So the program here is the one on education externalities in particular. And it involves sustained field operation in Benin and Nigeria for the past 12 years, and benefited from the academic infrastructure of the school. So currently we have 3 masters, 4 bachelor program campus in Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, some in Nigeria. We have joint degree program in South Africa, Hunter College, targeting minorities students in Hunter College, New York. So we have done very well placing students, 34 for the past 5 years, and then particularly we have this year has been great. We have 7 students in PhD. So so it's not just about what I have to take the opportunity to talk about my study of human capital externalities, but also what I'm doing about human capital externalities in economics in general, especially given that this helps sustain this program. Okay, so motivation. Knowledge diffusion, human capital, essential for growth. Channel, technology adoption, labor markets effects, institutions, occupation diversity. And there are recent research on long-term persistence, investment then still persists several centuries later. And then diffusion on social networks, and also aspiration and culture, for instance, can also be a mechanism through which human capital diffuse. So what I'm going to be talking to you about for the next hour is to try to provide an integrative approach to the study of human capital externalities and mechanism for their persistence using micro-evidence from Colonial School in Benin. And toward the end, I'm going to talk about what we are doing currently in Nigeria. And what is interesting about this is that there is this, we can assume that to some degree, location and cohort selection were to some degree exogenous. And we can exploit the timing and location of colonial institution. For instance, some locations have a colonial institution prior to the school being created. Some happen after the school were created. So and the big questions here I'll be addressing will, did colonial school generate externalities on the first 3 generations? What are the mechanisms? Labor market opportunities, income, aspiration, redistributive social norms. For instance, the educated helping the non-educated by paying school fees for their children. A locus of control, like uneducated people still now are empowered, as a result of school being around. So what I'm going to be, overall, the results are very, very strong. The educated have better living standards, are less likely to be subsistence farmers, have wider social ties. But I think the focus, and I think what's is most interesting, is the significant family village level externalities. For the second generation descendants of the village treated have better outcome than those in control. So having a school nearby or being in a network of people educated makes you much, much better off along several dimensions than those in control. Interesting also, inequality, income gap between the descendants of those whose parents have been to school and those whose parents did not go to school but live near a school. The income gap has closed significantly. And we argue, that the family externalities run through inter-family transfer, but also at the village level, which is big, the effect is big, I'm going to see in a second, run through parents' aspiration. Your parents have seen success around them, and it's too late for them, to pick it up, but then they basically make sure that their children pick up, and then the social norm in Africa where, like education of one child involve the whole family, the whole extended family and neighbors. So this help, this aspiration. Okay, so now that's part, on which the whole project is based. It's published, but I think the one that's not already, that we are still working on, is the third generation. So we find significant income and educational mobility in the third generation, which is not surprising, but the spectacular increase among descendants of village treated grandparents, particularly in low middle income categories. That's extremely strong. So first generation, a lot of income education gap, even though those living near educated, they pick up some economic opportunities, and speak, get some education. But the second generation, the gap decreased significantly. The second generation indirectly treated, so those living in a village with school but didn't go to school, they did better than those who were far from the school, so decrease in income, a decrease in gap. But then the third generation is as if those who did not get educated, those who did not educate the third generation, their grandchildren tend to do even better in terms of social mobility than those who were educated. So the greatest benefit on mobility happened from those who were indirectly treated, those who were village treated, I would be saying throughout, So, and then we show that mobility in the third generation is sustained by there are behavioral mechanisms, in the sense that we show that mobility is stronger and, it is associated, with positive attitude, which is like, positive life outlook, work ethics, self-reliance. So basically, we play the behavioral game and ask questions to third generation. So we were able to find correlation between, this increase in mobility with work ethics, self-reliance, and positive life outlook. So contribution, there are several at several levels. It contributes to social mobility literature by using applied micro approach. Because one thing is actually to sort of document mobility and look at places where mobility is higher and places where it's lower. But by documenting at micro level, you can come to mechanism more effectively, not only through labor markets, economic development mechanism, social network mechanism, and even political and and social norms mechanism as well. So I think this is the advantage of using a bit of micro approach. And then it's just have a comprehensive approach to the study of human capital externalities using micro data. And something that I'm also looking forward to is, there are places where the school was created after colonial settlement, mostly in the South. So you have some institutional variation, you have variation in institutional outcome prior to school being created. So this can help us disentangle the institutional effect and the human capital effect, what is interesting here is that institutions, for instance, colonial institution in particular, for instance, can enhance, the value of education because of, better labor market opportunities. At the same time, it can create hierarchies. It can create a more hierarchical social structure that will limit externalities. So maybe social externality, social network externality might be limited, but externality driven by labor market outcome might be higher. So you can see that institution might have not a straightforward effect on education externalities. So anyway, so that project is ongoing. Okay, so the conceptual framework that we are using is one. We have two framework that I'm going to be talking about very, very briefly. So I can send the slide. We're going to look at the details. So there is one approach that focuses on economic externalities. Where you have parental kind of income affecting choices made by the kids, either to go to school or not, to become farmers or not. What is fundamental prediction is persistence of human capital and income. Small disparities in ability early just explode, later on. The gap between rich and poor increase, So, the driver of this income inequality is that the rich can always invest optimally in education for every level of innate ability, but the poor cannot. But now, what will mitigate this result is the social network effect, and the general equilibrium effect, increased labor market opportunities for those who were non-educated, and then the intergenerational transfer from the rich educated to poor uneducated. Like for instance, I said early on, with family, within village, education of the poor kids, it's something that is a collective responsibility, and this can actually mitigate this prediction of this model, So, I'm not going to go through the context too much because I think some of you have seen it. I went through a lot of length, a lot of details to show, for instance, that the location and also the cohort selection were quasi exogenous, So, I documented here the routes that the initial, missionaries took to set up the school in my hometown, Zainado. And this is, the first cohorts, a picture of them in school in session. So, and I use this as an inspiration, for instance, to select other places that are very similar, and places with no European presence before, like Zainado, Saverne, Titengu, Kandi. And then I excluded, at least in the paper that came out already, the places that clearly had, European settlement. Those are this area. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm actually analyzing the data from the school set up here as a way to disentangle human capital effect on long-term development versus institutional effect, So, okay, so I think what is also extremely interesting, I'm going to, maybe you're already aware of this, but let me go through it anyway. What is actually innovative is the sampling procedure, So there are, first of all, when we identify a school, we manage to identify using archives, admin record, documents from colonial offices, church record, interview with informants, the lists of the kids, the 3 generations of kids who went to that school. So we have a complete list of the treated. Okay, now, so key to the whole project is what happened to those who were in the vicinity of the school, but did not attend school, because we want to document externalities. So what we did was that we look at subjects who live 7 kilometers radius from the school that did not attend school, and how we found out those subjects, well, by interviewing their descendants using backward sampling, So now what is interesting, and this was very central to the project in Nigeria that's currently in the field, is that among those from what we call treatment 2 or village treated, there are 2 types. Type 1, because if you look at in 7 kilometer radius, there are places, there are villages that close to the school have at least one individual who actually attended the school. But there might also be places where it's close to the school, but no one from the village had been to that school. So we have treatment 2, type 1, and treatment 2, type 2, okay? So, and then, so we have basically 3 groups. We have treatments, T1, treatment 2, T2, and then we have treatment 2, type 1, those who were exposed to education, have the opportunity, but no one living close by. So they are not part of a direct social network of uneducated. And type 2, those who live in a school without being part of the social networks. You can anticipate that, for instance, people from treatment 2, type 2, they might be close to control, So that's something that we can explore. So, and then subjects who live from 7 to 20 kilometers away are controlled. And there we also use backward sampling of subject, meaning we went there, like people in certain age living in those places, as member of grandparents, and have a control group, So, and then, we have the social demographic survey of T1, T2, age, profession, education, income, sibling, and so on. And Now, what we did in Nigeria is also really kind of interesting, is that in the first generation, we have, because we have polygamous families, and we want to identify the wife effect on the children education. So for that, we select up to 3 wives for the first generation subject, list the children of each wife, and then we sample up to 7 children. So, and then we make sure that the sample include the firstborn child, you know, and ensure gender proportionality, you know. And now we also select sibling, you know, to have extended family of the first generation, list all the nephew and nieces, that the children of those siblings. And then for that, we sample up to 7 nephew and nieces, and also make sure that there are women involved. You know, I mean, for instance, if you have 7 children, 7 nieces, you have 7, let's say you have, among the 7, if the family has has only one, we make sure that the gender, there is some kind of gender representation. Anyway, so, and then we after selecting children, nephew and nieces, we identify descendant, the second generation, following the same procedure. And so these are examples, for instance, of you know, here is the School of Candy is here. You know, we have 7 kilometers radius, 20 kilometer radius. Here is the treatment 2. You know, this village, for instance, is you know, treatment 2, you know, type 1, and you know, Keferi is treatment 2 type 2. You know, for instance. Anyway, so that's an example. So this is same exercise in Zainado, my hometown, and you know, the strategy has some similarities. Okay, let me, before I talk about similarities, I'm assuming that it has some similarities with what you know, Dell and Olkan has used in Tunisia to look at counterfactual places where you know, basically where factories, they have been set up and they were not. They use a different methodology than mine. So the design works because you have balanced characteristics on villages. Yeah, this is the Dell and Olkan strategy. Okay, so okay, so this is a picture, for instance, of a set of first cohorts in Zainado. So I was able to find the name of all these people. You know, I have to find the names, not only to interview, but also looking at school archives, I was able to locate. And, you know, I was also very lucky that, in fact, one of my uncle, who is here, was actually part of one of the cohorts. And, you know, she was a big inspiration for my mother, my dad as well, you know, and actually he did very well, you know, because he inspired this little boy to the left, who became like middle school here, and then, you know, much later, something fancier, you know, like the American Academy, you know, so that's cool. Anyway, so some of the guys were actually alive, you know, for instance, the last school in Wantchekon, in northern part of the country, this guy, we were able to manage to see him, to locate him, and to interview him. You know, we had details about a particularly social network, curriculum, and so on. So, and this is, I was personally involved in the interview. This is, for instance, the mayor of my hometown in the 60s, who remembered me quite well, you know, and then, and I interviewed him, you know. So I mentioned already second generation sampling procedure. I'm not going to go through the detail. So let me just go through the result very quickly, you know. So you can see.
Can I interrupt you with a couple of questions before you show the results about the sampling? There's a question about whether we know that people in treatment 2 type 2 knew that the school exists, and whether if they knew or didn't know, that may reflect some sort of network or information networks that were set up back in the day?
That's a great question. They know that the school exists. Maybe not first generation, but maybe with some delay, they know that the school exists. But then what is interesting is the value of schooling and the return to education. It's something that maybe it might be harder for them to see and to experience, and in the primary evidence that I was able to collect show that there is a big gap in school enrollments in treatment 2 type 1 and treatment 2 type 2, big, and particularly in places with higher agricultural productivity, because they always have to look at the opportunity cost of education for their children. And unless they have somebody close by who have been so spectacularly successful, they don't jump over, So I think, they know, but maybe with some delay. But that's what I can say, I mean, especially let's not forget that, for instance, the return, like meaning being hired as a teacher, being hired as a nurse, being hired later, and something that comes 10 years, 15 years later, So they might not see the progress that the educated are making. So this, what I'm saying, the direct connection with educated is something that's highly, highly valuable, and you can see that as part of the results.
I see.
So,
and the second question that comes here, I think you're going to get to it later, but maybe good to clarify it now. Is about the selection bias. While you're sampling backwards, maybe there's some people that you're just getting the people who, for example, did not migrate, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess that's going to generate a downward bias in your estimates, right?
Yeah, but also we tried the best we could to mitigate that. For instance, we have the recall bias, we have other type of biases that might come up, and we show in the QJE paper that the results still remain. I mean, like, for instance, we tried the best we could to list everyone first, and then to randomly select 7 among these. And the difficulty is migration. When people migrate, what happened to them? So we have to follow, particularly the second generation, and sometimes the third generation outside the place where they were born. And over there, their impact, their income or their outcome depend not only on where they come from, but also depend on where they are. It's something that we didn't capture properly, but then we are trying to capture that mostly in the, in the Nigerian project. Yeah, migration, the migration effect. Okay, I mean, great. Especially something that happened also is that, those places can experience some reversal of fortune, because they are very successful people, everyone leave and no one left. And as a result, the place goes down, and also, especially when people go for jobs in the public sector, it's not like the entrepreneur who invests money back home, creates shops and economic opportunities. So over time, the place can collapse as a result of migration. So that's also a very interesting phenomenon that can be addressed with policy, by, for instance, promoting entrepreneurship to fix people back home as opposed to everybody have to leave or something, Anyway, so but as you can see, what we are doing here, what is actually what I'm extremely excited about is that we are actually collecting micro data in villages in 19th century. In villages early 20th century. And some of the big macro kind of stories we tell about pre-colonial Africa, colonial Africa, is something that you can actually connect directly with microdata here, which is really interesting. You know, for and also what is also quite interesting is also the control is the typical African village with very little European influence, little European presence, and the treated villages are the one with electoral European influence, and the gap between the two that enhanced by communication issues and infrastructure shows that there were places, a lot of places in Africa that you can describe as being virtually non-colonized, you know, because the level of colonial penetration is very, very weak. So when you want to look at counterfactual of what colonial what colonialism does, you can actually focus on those places, you know, that have very little colonial penetration. Anyway, so yeah,
and
so you can see
a final question on selection. Sorry, I think that you addressed it in your QJ paper, but it would be good to clarify it for the audience. How are the kids, the first generation kids, selected to go to school, or is it the case that every kid in the village?
Yeah, exactly. So okay, that's a great question. So basically, the story we heard over again is that in most of the interior places, like places that part of this sample, the selection of the kids were near random, in a sense, like the elites do not want to send their kids because they didn't want their kids to be taken away. At least, you know, we have the chiefs. They can take care of their kids. They don't know, you know, they don't want to get some foreigners and some people, priests and whatever, to take care of their kids on their behalf. But then, take care of their kids. But then, so the way it works is that, you know, the priest and the colonial, they hunt, I'm not hunt, but I mean, they get out to find kids. They get out of their way to find kids. My uncle, for instance, the story I heard was that he didn't go to the farm with my dad because he was sick. And then a priest came along and saw him and asked him to go with the priest. And they went to the chief to ask for permission. He said, yes, yeah, take him. And then that's how he started school. You know, my dad was unlucky to be at the farm that day, you know, and you think, you know, so you hear a lot of stories like that, you know, and I think the third three generation, the selection was near random. But that's not the case in places that are close to the coast, where there were a lot of already European settlement, there were shops, there were, you know, a lot of investment and, you know, and businesses, and, you know, the value of education was known. As a result, you have a lot of self-selection, you know, in the coastal areas. So, but here, you know, there is kind of near random. And we check for that, you know, by showing, for instance, similarities across treatment and control in terms of background of the children. Yeah. So anyway, as you can see here, a lot of inequalities, you know, like the treated are only 14% to be subsistence farmers, and the untreated in village with school, that's treatment 2, it's much higher. And then much higher is the control, you know, and then along, you know, in social network scale and other characteristics similar. Okay, so this is, you know, you can see, for instance, that individual treatments is effective, but village treatments is not significantly connected with, I mean, the result is not significant for village treated first generation. Okay, so this is a picture of a treated family, picture of a you know, even like a controlled family, and social ties, like people with, you can see here that, for instance, people who are village treated, they speak some French, So this captures some externalities. It could be like pidgin, it could be like the pidgin language that they speak, but it's make them maybe more functional than in control. And they have higher social networks and so on. So that's the first generation. The second generation, for instance, you can see the gap has drastically decreased. It's still the case that the treated are more educated. The treated kids are more educated, but the untreated parents in village, the kids from untreated parents get caught up drastically, and the control has improved as well, So, and you can see also the drastic decrease in, living standard and occupation of the kids, of those whose parents were not even educated, So now this is formalized here. Okay, so, okay, that's social ties, same story, okay. Now, something which is a very, very important result from the paper is how well nephew and nieces doing. They do even much better than those in the village. So the family externalities are stronger than village externalities, okay? So, treated individuals have impact on their family member in various ways, aspiration. That's why people in the village have done well. Redistribution, that's why people in the family have done exceptionally well. They can also set up family business, which is very, very common. So one thing we did is to look at sibling of a treated who owned the shop. And we find that when you are uneducated and you work for your brother who have set up a shop, who employ you, your children are 20% less likely to be farmers. So it shows that entrepreneurial human capital is actually more effective here. When, for instance, the educated not only works for government, but also is an entrepreneur, like set up a family business to hire his or her brother, the effect is much, much stronger, So we translate this into, what it's called? It's transition metrics to show the degree of mobility, second generation, Okay, now let me now go to third generation, The third generation is, basically the ongoing research. So as you can see to the third generation, in terms of income, the third generation whose parents are low income, like low income, they are nearly 70% of chance to do better than their parents. So mobility in the third generation is overall spectacular, Okay, now this doesn't tell the whole story, but the story here is here. So you can feel like, well, this mobility is natural because after all, we have a significant sample of individuals who actually been to school, so we see what happened. But in fact, the results are driven by those whose grandparents were living near a school, did not go to school. You can see, for instance, here that even among those who were the treated individual, like people whose grandparents were educated, when you are low income, you are basically something like, 71% of chance to do better than your parents. But when your grandparent was not educated, it's like nearly 88%. It shows that in terms of third generation mobility, the indirectly treated the T2 individual have done much, much better, you know. So, and I did some extrapolation and show that, you know, like the degree of mobility in that category can be considered to be some of the very best that you can find anywhere, you know. I'm afraid to say that I belong to that category, but I'm not part of the sample, you know. Okay, so control is still very low degree of mobility, but some mobility nonetheless. And so another exercise that we have done is inequality. If school induce such a great income mobility, what are the implications for inequality within village and within families? So for that, we construct within village and within family standard deviation of wealth and compare it by treatment status. And we construct within village deviation from average wealth and plot it by treatment status and generation. And I think this tells the story here. So you can see, for instance, that in the first generation, we treated, you know, very unequal, you know. So first generation control, there is more inequality in the treated village versus the control. Second generation, something similar, but then third generation, the reverse completely. So the treated villages in the third generation have lower inequality than control. And again, this is driven by what happened to the grandparents, what happened to the grandchildren of the uneducated leaving the village. So it just shows that, you know, the Gatsby curve story, it's something that holds in this setting, but it's driven not by the educated, but by uneducated in the first generation, you know. And then, you know, I mean, so you can say, well, you know, I mean, from first to second, the focus was on, from the first to second, the focus was on aspiration. You know, you just live near someone, social networks, inspiring, bingo, it works, you know. And when you are in the family, you can also benefit from some transfer, that works. If you live in the family, he can hire you, or in the, you know, in the business, family business that he set up, bingo. So this works very well. Now, in the third generation, we decided to focus on attitudes. So we have measure like time preference, mental health, work ethics, self-reliant life outlook, using some of the methodology that you know, Angus did and others have set up. And we find that, okay, but the focus here is to look at basically the effect of mobility itself on those variables. You know, for instance, if your father did better, okay, if you are moving up, how does it affect the, okay, when there is moving up from first to the second generation, how does it affect the mental health, work ethics, self-reliance, like outlook of the third generation? So, and we find that you know, it's positive. The result for time preference is not significant, but mental health, work ethics, self-reliance is positive and significant, particularly for mental health. You know, so you know, I mean, so it's interesting because I mean, like, you know, when I was doing the survey myself, you can find you know, people who are in villages that are still very poor, like you know, basically upper lower class, if you will, but they are extremely optimistic. They are still upbeat, and you can sort of it sense that despite them still, you know, being relatively poor, they are doing much better than their parents, who did much better than their grandparents. You know, an exercise that we tried, but you know, we are going to continue with Nigerian project, is to just have three categories in the middle class. So we have middle class people moving down from upper class, middle class people moving up, middle class people who remain middle class. You see what I mean? So, and see, for instance, what the effect of middle class, but moving down versus middle class moving up. You know, you can sort of understand how where you are matters, but also where you come from also might matter. So this has some flavor of that, but in fact, we are, you know, we haven't, you know, anyway, we need some further tests, you know, to look at this in more detail. There is some gender effect and so on. We did, you know, IV estimates, and the result essentially remain, particularly for self-reliance, work ethics, and life outlook. And we use treatment status as an IV for social mobility. Okay, so okay, let me finish by talking about where we are. So very quickly, as I said, I'm running at least five big follow-up projects, and they are all ongoing. So we are doing identical project in Nigeria, in all these states. What is interesting about Nigeria is that, okay, one second. What is interesting about Nigeria, we have more regional variation. So the North is Muslim, the South is Christian, and, you know, and for instance, you have obstacle to gender, you know, education in the North, less in the South. And some communities have strong centralized local institutions, like in the North, less in the East, you know. So, and we are doing this. And, you know, and what else? The earlier schools that were created have girls. We have some girls' school, while in Benin, none, you know. So two key additions, regional variation and gender, you know. And actually, Nigeria is a much bigger country. And yeah, and also something important is that in some locations you have competition. You know, for instance, you have the school Catholic school being set up, and nearby the Protestant schools also come in. And you have the competition, for instance, between two type of mission school generates, you know, stronger competition, and this can also boost the result. So, you know, something in the data that already confirmed is that, you know, like you have, even in control, you know, a lot of externalities even in controlled villages. Maybe, I don't know, is it driven by indirect rule and the fact that there is room for, you know, basically English to spill over more quickly than French? I don't know. So that's something to look for. And what is also interesting is how education enables Nigerians to speak to each other as opposed to just in their community. So what I'm saying is that the unifying effect of foreign education in people from different communities, that's something that pop up in this. You know, so basically, the school led to increased knowledge in Nigerian languages. And yeah, so in many schools, women were much less likely than men to have attended school for a lengthy time, but again, much better than Benin. But female descendants of first students are more likely to have attended school, so there is a strong gender effect, something that we can explore. And they're also likely to have business partners from other Nigerian ethnic groups. So, you know, national integration is something that colonial schools may have contributed to, you know. So, you know, housing quality, income is also there. So, so for now, you know, the paper in Nigeria is focusing on first generation, but then we are looking at second and third, as we did in Nigeria. So we did in Benin. So very, very hopeful. So let me talk about this exciting project as well that we are conducting. You know, in southern Benin, the location that had European institutions before school were created, have a characteristics. One characteristic is that they were populated early on by European settlers, like from Portugal, from France, and from Holland, but they also populated by free slaves from Brazil, who moved back and settled there. It's interesting because these people have more wider social networks because they speak Portuguese, but they see themselves as African, and they actually came back to actually help set businesses and take and contribute to local development and so on. And we were able with a colleague from Brazil, we find about 3,000 to 4,000 passports of these people coming back. And this is an example. So basically we have the names of all of them, names of all the ones who came back. We know gender, we know assets, we know everything that they came up with. And then we also, when we came back to Africa, to Benin, we also find we also have their baptism data. So that helps us to also set up to have their social networks, So for instance, it was interesting that they have connections with local chiefs to help secure property rights. They also have connection with Europeans to open up, markets to Europe. Not surprisingly, they did spectacularly well. I think one of them was the richest man in Africa in late 19th century. So this is one of the projects we are currently conducting, and hopefully by October or November, we are going to have the first draft of the paper. But another project which is very close to my heart is the intergenerational social impact of the Dahomey Amazons. As you know, as you may know, for instance, one of the features of central Benin is that you have these female warriors who were real institutions, in all the community where they were. So I was able to identify the last cohorts, and was able to find a list of 100 of them. And then I was able to, with colleagues from ASC, we're able to find where they live, their family status and children, their neighbors, their economic activities, and so on. And then, exactly like I did before, in the 7-kilometer radius, for instance, people living close to them, are they more likely to, for instance, have different gender attitudes? For instance, are they more likely to be educated? Are they more likely to be independent-minded? For instance, to convert to Christianism, because of their strong women, independent-minded? And do they change, for instance, the institutions at local level? So we have a lot of qualitative information about this. For instance, stories about tax revolts that one of them organized in the 40s. And only a former Amazon can actually organize a tax revolt from those days because of the level of colonial repression. Anyway, so, similar exercise, look at intergenerational impact, but here focusing on gender. And I was lucky, when you are doing a project like this, you can be unexpectedly rewarded. This time rewarded by Hollywood, Hollywood is making a movie about the Amazons. And Lupita is here, and Bialy Davis is here, and I've been hired as, what do we call it again? Historical consultant. Yeah, historical consultant. So I'm sharing all the information I have about the data from the Amazons that are being integrated. There are things that I didn't expect to be looking at, like for instance, in the battlefield, what they eat, for how they dispose the body and this kind of stuff. That's the part that I was not really, interested in early on, but then I'm doing all this. Anyway, so the movie is going to be out, I think in September. It's currently being basically done in South Africa. Anyway, so summary, very quickly. I study mobility of the 3 generations, income, education, and find upward mobility across 3 generations. persistence, grandparents' education on mobility. But I think what is more important here is what's happened to grandparents who got some kind of aspiration shock by living near someone who was educated. The effect was stronger, more persistent in the third generation. And I think this has really important kind of policy implication. Like we need to pay attention not only to the supply side, but also the demand side, and try to see how demand side can be shaped by proximity, by social networks, and especially this kind of tight family social network culture, if you will, in many African countries. Yeah, thank you very much.
Great, thanks a lot. So if anyone in the audience has a question, just raise your hand and now open up the microphone for you. In the meantime, I think Robin is taking the lead here.
Leonard, I guess what I was trying to figure out is presumably if you got educated, then you were more likely to leave the village, right? So you would so you might move to the city or So how did you? I wasn't seeing the detail of how you track that. Do you ask people who are still in the village about what happened to everybody, all the relations, or do you just look at the people who are still remaining inside the village?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, in Benin and also in Nigeria, what we did was basically we list everyone, and among the list of in that list, some people stay back, some people have left, and then we document not only those who are those who left, but those who stay back. And for instance, the survey team will interview people in the capital city where the villagers have moved, and will also interview people regardless where they are, you know. Okay. So that's basically what we did. But I mean, what we haven't done in this Benin paper, we are going to do in Nigerian data, with Nigerian data, is actually to look closely at the networks structure of where people live, not just where they come from. Okay. You see what I mean? So we can document the migration effect more effectively, you know. So the focus here has been what's happened, the dividing line between groups in the first generation, and then set things up for the second and the third. But we still need to, you know, look at closely, and we have the opportunity to do it with the networks of the second generation, the network of the third generation, and see the added effect those networks have on the outcome of those who are educated. And as I mentioned earlier, the fact that because everyone who is successful leaves, or most people leave, it leads to a sharp decline in places that used to be highly successful. Mm-hmm. And in generating highly educated individuals. You know, if you see, for instance, you know, my small town village where I grew up, you know, in the 60s, you have 93% at least primary school enrollment rates. And in my generation, out of 40 kids, we are 13 PhDs, so highly, highly successful. But there are a lot of empty houses there now, you know, meaning we build things back because, you know, we want to sort of, but, you know, nobody lives there. Very few people live there. So, yeah. But it will be different, for instance, if we have been able to set up, you know, businesses, you know, farming and, you know, whatever opportunity, so that some of the people, our children, will actually come back to the village, and those who are there can have more opportunities. You know, I think it's important that we promote among the diaspora and people who have left, not only like, you know, my colleague Okonkwo have shown, get them not to just build houses, homes, so that they can celebrate their parents, but to actually set up businesses and take advantage of the fact that there is human capital investment being made, people coming from there were educated. So it's a wonderful opportunity to provide, development opportunities over there. Anyway, so that's what I can say.
Yeah.
Leonard, let me just pick up on a question from the chat. So I was also unclear on why is it the case that the effects on the third generation are so large? Is it because is the effect driven by those who in the second generation got more education, or it's a pure externality effect? So what's your sense of the mechanism by which the effect on the third generation is so large?
Yeah, so my sense is that, okay, let me put it this way. Let me maybe go back to, let me see the table. Okay, 1 second. Yeah, the third generation. Okay, like here. So first of all, two things to notice is that look at those are grandchildren of educated. These are grandchildren of non-educated living near a school. So you can see that here, they are far less likely to be lower class here than here, which is, super interesting. So one possible channel is that, from this paper, what we find is that the educated in the first generation, they tend to have several wives, they have large families, and then you have more inequality among children than here. So that's one. And also the redistributive norms within this type of individuals might be, higher. But also what this shows is the persistence of aspiration shock, because the way the second generation succeed is because their parents push them. You see what I mean? Like the way I treat my children reflect the way my mother treated me, and many of the uneducated first generation, they were just crazy about education because they saw the spectacular increase of income and status among those from this group, and I can tell you anecdotes after anecdotes, like, it's insane, some of the things that I experienced, like, my mom in particular, like she's, my favorite story is one of my older brother, who is like a hippie type person, like music and stuff. So super smart, but he not interested in going to school. So he went to 6th grade and stopped going to school for 7 years or something. So, and then after 7 years, because he's so smart and stuff, he got a job as a nursing aide. He was already 22. He wanted to take the job, and my mother said, absolutely not. You go back to school. So my brother went back to 6th grade when he was 23. Because it was everything. So for instance, this attitude, maybe this shock was so massive that maybe people from second generation picked a little bit, pick up, you see what I mean? So nothing for granted, pushing hard. So this might be why, like even when you are low income second generation, but your grandfather was uneducated, you are going to push your kid maybe higher. So that could be persistence or aspiration. I also mentioned behavior. You have seen that you move spectacular from first generation to second generation. So nothing bad can ever happen to you. So as a result, you are more, you tend to be more kind of optimistic, you tend to be more upbeat, and as a result, you do much better, So, I mean, there is some parallel between this and immigrants in the US. You can see, because the spectacular gap from when they migrate from some poor places or from Europe to the US and their children, it's something that persists, because you treat your children the way your parents have treated you. The aspiration of your parents is something that stay with you, So it's something that we really want to explore much deeper in the Nigerian data. Or we can also, in a follow-up paper on this, is something that we can look very, very closely. Distinguishing between, is that, to what extent this is persistent of aspiration? To what extent it's actually, or this persistence, was it manifest itself through behavioral, or, also this one, redistributing norm within the family, more cooperation, less, because the difference between these two, it's something which is very, very puzzling to me, So, I mean, anecdotally, you can see that. I mean, like, for instance, you have people from very kind of large family, early, highly educated family. Some of them are spectacularly successful. Some are just criminal, like they don't, I mean, criminal, maybe too, I'm maybe exaggerating. But what I'm saying is that, they fail miserably, and so because some families from this category have, 20, 18, 15 kids, while people from this, they cannot afford only few, and they happen to be in an environment which is simulating, So there are a lot of things to explore, and I think so to summarize, persistence of early aspiration shock, translating into some of behavioral change, and maybe redistributive culture, maybe stronger here than over there, and also maybe family size, fertility.
And Leonard, one additional question, especially coming from you, I'm surprised not to see politics playing a role here. So basically, what you have in these villages is a big push on education. So I'm wondering, how does governance change in these villages? Is there more power sharing between traditional chiefs and these newly educated kind of new elites that are coming up at the village level? Is there some sort of support for some sort of modernization story at the village level?
So that's a great question. So it's I think I'm encouraged to actually explore this even further. So what is kind of interesting is that political participation in the so the externalities might be through social networks. It could also be through economic opportunities. Like the educated setting up businesses to hire the uneducated. It could also be through political participation. In a sense, like the educated, they have voice, and they express this voice through demand to open up opportunities for everyone. And I think some of those places where you have a very high level of youth social activism in the 60s and the 70s. It's no surprise that, I, being one of somebody coming from that group, I was political activist when I was even from middle school, because I experienced abuse, I experienced lack of opportunities, and education, and the fact that we have connections with young people from the village who went to study in France, in Senegal, and stuff, get us to mobilize and to demand, opportunities early. So for instance, I remember, for instance, that's a very good point. So I remember, for instance, that we got the principal from my village school fired in the 70s because the results were very bad. You know, like he was a good friend with the mayor, the guy that I just showed you earlier. It was his friend. But we got this teacher fired from the school, you know, because, so we were really the voice of our parents, not only, you know, political voice, if you will, of our parents, you know, and I think one of the channels clearly could have been political mobilization and to open up opportunities to get government to invest more in education, to help teachers and school accountable and stuff, you know. So, you know, I mean, early on when I look at the political variable, people were focused on rent seeking, you know. Education can get you to seek rent as opposed to involve in productive activities. That's possible. And you can look at this by checking, for instance, how the collusion that might exist between the educated and politicians, nationally and locally. It could well be that, for instance, you are more likely to see this collusion, you know, this capture in places that have, you know, traditionally very connected families, like the one that I mentioned, a former slave from Brazil and so on. You see what I mean? Like in those areas that are more where exposure to education were benefited mostly to lower class people who move up very, very fast, there might be less an incentive to do rent seeking, more incentive to engage in politics that open up opportunity for others, you know, like more leftist style politics. You know, you know, I think that's a great point. It's something that we are going to explore. You know, to see, for instance, where social movement pop up, what type of social movement pop up in different areas, and understand conditions. You know, the education opportunities that led to this, and the role that this played, for instance, in this result, you know, mobility of this guy. Because these guys didn't know protection. They already have money, they come from large families, but these guys that did spectacularly well, it could well be because their kids were, you know, were also not only, you know, wealthier, but also they were engaged politically that helped more investment to provide opportunity for others. And anyway, so yeah, I think that's, you know, as you can see, I don't have a clear view on this, but you know, it's something that we are definitely going to explore. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. So there is one question from Orlando. Orlando, you can ask, just open up your mic and ask your question. We have like 3 minutes, so let's try to be brief.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much for this super interesting presentation. My question, I think you barely touched the point, but I was wondering about the curricula that was being taught, especially for the first generation. Yeah, I was wondering a little bit more about this because at least I know, for example, with the educational institutions in Portuguese Africa, it was really related to kind of enhance the agricultural practices of the individuals that went there. But apparently here, I guess it related more towards creating small markets or businesses and way of thinking away from agriculture. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, no, that's a great point. So I think that we are going to look at the curriculum very closely. I think the curriculum was just to get people to read and write at the basic level so that they can actually, particularly for the first generation, so that they can work in governments, they can work to support the colonial administration. So I think that that was very, very, very clear. But then the second generation, you know, like 40s and 50s, for instance, there was a movement away from this very basic, you know, this curriculum, you know, focus on basic education, and with the opening of secondary school and universities, particularly in Senegal, and also opportunity for young people to go to France. But what you are referring to is what perhaps more likely in Nigeria than it is in Benin, because in Benin, education was very, very driven by public employment. It's what public employment is what was the driver. So, the aspirational individuals to work in the public sector, so training to enhance agricultural productivity, for instance, is not something that was developed well. I know, for instance, that in Benin, there was one place that have such school. It's northeast Benin. It's a place called Borgu. And today, if you find an agricultural engineer, an agroeconomist, or even people who are plant biologists or botanists and stuff, there are at least 50% of chance that they are going to come from that place. So what I'm saying is that you even have variation in the curriculum, particularly when it comes to secondary school level across the country. So and Northeast region have curriculum and education opportunities similar to what you just described. But yes, but then it's something that we need to document more closely. And to also look at persistence, at that level. So, and I also know that there are differences between mission schools and public school. Mission school where really, the curriculum was to facilitate conversion to Catholic religion and to Protestant religion as well. And we need to see, for instance, what is the gap, what is the difference between the curriculum that were taught. The curriculum in those schools and the one in public school. So, but one thing you were talking about curriculum, one thing that I'm very, very interested in, that we are also working on with some funding from Gates Foundation, is basically how to integrate local history, local culture in the curriculum. Because after all, these curriculums and colonial education is teach basic skills, but it doesn't get people to have better agency, better understanding of where they come from, and connects students with the community where they were born. So if there were one big reform in many African education systems, should be not only, research, not only, increase demand and drive, but also integrates history, culture in local education as a way, to get a stronger sense of identity to kids, better motivation to study, because they will be stimulated not only by the teacher, but also by the environment where they come from, So yes, short answer, what you said happened in one location, and that was very effective, but it's not general, something that we need to study more closely. But then again, I think it's really important, for instance, to think of reforms that improve curriculum by including more knowledge, like the one I'm presenting, because it's something that should be integrated in the curriculum for people to know who they are, where they come from, and so on. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Leonard, for a fascinating talk and super interesting thoughts. So we're 5 minutes over time already, so let's just leave it here. And if anyone wants to keep talking with Leonard about research, I just posted a Zoom link in the chat. Leonard, I just realized that I forgot to ask you for the Zoom link, but Giacomo just emailed it to you.
I'm sorry, what is it?
If you can stay just 10 minutes to discuss.
Yes, I will. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm happy to stay. So just stay where I am, right?
No, go to the link that Giacomo just emailed you.
Oh, okay. Via they sent the email. Send it to me via email. Is that what it is?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. Will do.
Thank you so much. And hope to catch up soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.